My 36th birthday was supposed to be quiet. I had kept the guest list short, just Marlene, my mother Rowan, and her fiancé. We were sitting around a small table at a pretentious but quiet restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the silence felt almost as stiff as my professional life as a museum curator. I'd spent all day trying to look relaxed, but the low, humming anxiety that always accompanied Rowan was present. She commanded attention, leaning forward, telling loud, theatrical stories that made Marlene beam. I sat in the polite shadow, drinking water, and trying to look grateful for the fleeting attention I received. The small, dark chocolate cake arrived. The candles were lit, and the chorus of "Happy Birthday" felt thin and forced, mostly carried by Rowan's soaring, dramatic voice. I leaned in to make my wish something simple. Maybe just for an hour of real peace. That was when it happened. It wasn't a playful push, it was a shove. Rowan's hands, strong and cold, slammed the heavy ceramic platter right into my face. The world snapped sideways. I remember the sickly sweet smell of the chocolate frosting coating my entire head, the sting of the impact, and the bizarre sensation of warm, metallic liquid running down my neck, mingling with the sugary goo. My chair scraped backward violently, and I hit the hardwood floor hard. The ringing in my ears was loud, but it didn't drown out Rowan's laughter. It was bright, sharp. And entirely deliberate as I struggled to find my footing in the frosting and spilled wine. People rushed in, but their shock quickly dissolved when Rowan pulled me up, embracing me while saying, "Oops, clumsy me. Just a joke, Amber, lighten up." Marlene immediately stepped in, her hands fluttering dismissively. "It's fine. She's fine. Amber, don't be dramatic." Rowan didn't mean it. Well, my vision pulsed blue and white, with a ferocious throbbing starting at the base of my skull. I did my best to believe them. I stumbled to the restroom, wiping away the chocolate and realizing the warm liquid was indeed blood, probably from a cut near my ear. I rinsed my face and saw the dark bruise already forming high on my cheekbone. Back in the dining room, the atmosphere was already reset. Rowan was performing apology, loud and charming, successfully making the incident about her own accidental exuberance. I endured the rest of the night in a daze. The constant ache in my skull, making every light seem too bright, and every sound too loud. I left early, the steering wheel cold beneath my sticky palms, attempting to rationalize the violence. Maybe it was just an accident. Maybe Rowan was just being Rowan. Maybe I was overreacting. That was the narrative I had been fed my entire life. Amber is too sensitive. Amber is always making a scene. The truth of that narrative had shaped my entire life. Lying awake later, my head pounding, something felt different. The pain was too sharp to be easily dismissed. The memory of Rowan's grinning eyes, not apologetic but triumphant, kept flashing behind my eyelids. Yet, even as nausea rolled through me, a lifetime of conditioning whispered that seeking help would just confirm what my mother always said. I was weak, and I couldn't handle myself. I would wait it out. It was just a concussion, probably. It had to be just a joke. But the memory of Rowan's triumphant eyes, not apologetic, was too sharp to dismiss. I didn't wait it out. I didn't wait it out. The pain had won. By morning, the headache wasn't just a throbbing ache. It was a vicious, rhythmic hammer against the back of my skull. When I tried to sit up, a wave of nausea nearly sent me sprawling. Bright daylight made my vision double, turning my small Seattle apartment into a wavering, painful blur. I stumbled to the bathroom, and when my fingers touched the tender spot behind my left ear, they came away sticky with dried, crusty blood. That was the moment fear crept in, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't a joke, and it wasn't just clumsiness. The thought of calling Marlene paralyzed me. I could already hear her high, controlled voice, a sound designed to smooth over any inconvenient emotion. "You don't need a doctor, Amber. You bruise easily. Stop making a scene." Or worse, Rowan's light, dismissive laugh that always made me feel smaller than I already was, like a speck under a microscope. Going alone felt reckless, but calling my family felt impossible. I chose recklessness over confrontation. I dressed slowly, gripping the doorframe as the room swayed, waiting for the vertigo to pass. The drive to the closest emergency room was agony, each bump in the road sending a spike of fire through my head. I focused entirely on the road lines, determined not to fail now, determined not to give Marlene the satisfaction of saying I was fragile. Seattle's downtown emergency room was busy, a chaotic rush of white uniforms and hurried footsteps. The noise was unbearable, amplified by my pounding head. I flinched so badly under the harsh, overhead, fluorescent lights that the triage nurse, a woman named Janet, guided me immediately to an exam room instead of the waiting area. The sudden kindness felt like a physical shock. I sat shivering under a thin paper gown, trying to regulate my breathing. Janet asked the standard questions. When did the injury happen? How did it happen? Was there a loss of consciousness? I answered each one, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. My sister shoved a cake into my face. Shouldn't have sounded like a medical emergency. Yet the truth had brought me here. Trembling and alone. A few minutes later, the curtain parted, and Dr. Ethan Hanley stepped in. He was professional and calm, his eyes attentive as he reviewed my chart. He asked me to follow his finger, to squeeze his hands, to touch my nose, and to smile. The room tilted constantly, making the coordination exercises difficult. But I performed them dutifully. The injury sounds significant, given the severity of the nausea and light sensitivity, he said, his voice low and measured. We need to rule out anything serious. Let's get some scans of CT and an X-ray, just to be safe. Safe. I hadn't felt that word applied to my family in decades. As the nurse prepped me for the imaging room, I kept replaying Rowan's face, the wide, sharp grin. I'd the flicker of something triumphant in her eyes that I had always explained away. Misread it, excused it, minimized it. Now, with my skull throbbing and the world spinning, the excuses felt painfully fragile. The imaging machinery was cold and hummed loudly. Lying still, staring at the sterile ceiling tiles, the reality of my predicament finally settled. I had allowed myself to be harmed, physically and systematically, because the truth was too exhausting to defend. I was tired of being the dramatic one. When Dr. Hanley returned, he pulled a stool close. His gentle composure was gone, replaced by a focused, serious intensity. He turned the monitor toward me. The light from the screen reflected on his face, showing an image I couldn't yet decipher. He drew a deep breath and looked directly into my eyes, and I knew instinctively that the simple, all clear, I had desperately hoped for was not coming. Something terrible was about to be revealed. The light from the screen washed over Dr. Hanley Rowan's face, emphasizing the gravity in his eyes. I felt my stomach drop, bracing for a typical concussion diagnosis, but his first words cut through my expectations entirely. Amber, he began, his voice low but firm. You have a hairline fracture at the base of your skull, right behind your ear. It's not severe enough to require immediate surgery, but it's real. The diagnosis should have been the worst news, yet my mind immediately went to minimization. Okay, a fracture. It happens. It was a hard fall. I tried to formulate an excuse, a way to tell him it was just a terrible fluke, but he didn't give me the chance. He clicked the mouse, bringing up a new image on the monitor, a different view, one of my torso. That fracture is recent, consistent with the trauma you described yesterday. He continued, pointing to a faint, dark line on the skull image. But the reason I need to talk to you carefully is this. He moved his cursor to the rib cage visible on the screen. We ran a full-body X-ray due to the severity of the impact, and we found an older injury. He tapped a specific spot on my left side. This here, your sixth rib, shows clear signs of an older fracture. Based on the callus formation, It happened roughly 3 years ago. It healed on its own, but it was definitely broken. The room spun, but this time it wasn't the vertigo. 3 years ago. The staircase fall. The sudden, inexplicable shove from behind. The breathless agony that lasted for weeks, which I was told was just a bad bruise from being clumsy. Rowan had been right there, her arms around me afterward, whispering that I was dramatic and that I had simply slipped. Marlene had insisted I didn't need a doctor, because the bills would be ridiculous. I felt the hard edges of the exam table, digging into my palms as I struggled to breathe, struggling against the decades of conditioned denial. 3 years ago. I whispered, the words tasting like ash. The staircase. Dr. Hanley watched me, his expression clinical but sympathetic, gauging exactly how much information I could process. He gave me a moment, the silence punctuated only by the distant beeping of machines. Then, he exhaled, picked up the old-fashioned hospital phone mounted to the wall, and dialed an internal extension. This is Dr. Hanley in the emergency department. I need to report a trauma case, he stated clearly into the receiver. The patient, Amber Dalton, 36, has a recent skull fracture. More critically, there is evidence of an older, previously unreported fracture on the rib cage, indicating a pattern of injuries. He paused, listening to the response. Yes, consistent with the history provided. I need to make the mandated report. Mandated report. Required. As in, not a joke. As in, not my imagination. The reality of the situation hammered at the fragile walls of blame I had built around myself. When he finally hung up, his eyes met mine, quiet and steady. He didn't offer comfort or platitudes. He offered a single, objective truth that obliterated my history. Amber, he said, using my name with a weight I hadn't heard before. Someone did this to you. The words echoed in my head, louder than the pounding inside my skull. Someone did this to you. I had spent a lifetime twisting facts, absorbing blame, and convincing myself that Rowan's convenient presence during every injury, the accidental bump that sent me into a table, the tripped fall in the parking lot, the staircase disaster was purely coincidence. Accidents happen, sister's roughhouse. I'm just clumsy. But Dr. Hanley's steady gaze and the two fractures staring back at me from the screen left no room for the lies I'd told myself to survive. A soft, measured knock came before a new voice spoke. Dr. Hanley, I'm Detective Carver. The unit dispatched me. A woman stepped into the room. She was poised, with a calm, professional air that suggested she dealt with painful, inconvenient truths daily. She pulled a chair close, positioning herself at eye level. Ms. Dalton. She began, opening a small notebook. Your injuries raise concerns that go beyond a simple accident. I need to ask you some questions about your safety. My throat tightened. I knew exactly who she was asking about, even if she hadn't said the name. This was it. The moment I had to choose between protecting myself and protecting the illusion of my perfect, peaceful family. Detective Nina Carver pulled her chair closer, opening a small notepad. Dr. Hanley left us, promising to return with discharge papers and follow-up instructions. I was alone now, facing a legal authority, forced to articulate the messy, inconvenient truth of my family. Ms. Dalton, I understand this is difficult. Detective Carver began, her voice measured and professional. But my job is to gather facts. Based on what Dr. Hanley reported, we need to know who was present during the incident yesterday. And specifically, if this sister has been present during any other accidents that required medical attention, or perhaps should have required it. She started with straightforward questions. Who was at the birthday dinner? Had there been alcohol? Where exactly was Rowan standing when she executed the shove? I answered them mechanically. Each word I spoke out loud about Rowan. The description of the sharp grin, the deliberate motion. Felt like a betrayal of the family loyalty I was raised to uphold. And regarding previous injuries, Carver continued, her pen hovering over the page. The rib fracture Dr. Hanley found. It is old, consistent with trauma 3 years ago. What happened then? I fell down the stairs. I whispered. At my mother's house. I was clumsy, I missed a step. Is anyone else present? Yes. Rowan was behind me. And did you seek medical attention for the rib pain? I shook my head, avoiding her gaze. No. I thought it was just a bad bruise. My sister. She told me I was overreacting. She insisted I didn't need medical bills for a slip. Detective Carver wrote quietly, then looked up. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes held a quiet knowing. Has anyone else ever discouraged you from seeking medical help after an injury or accident? That question, so precise and objective, acted like a key in a lock inside me. It wasn't just about the injury. It was about the control. It was about the repeated erosion of my right to feel pain. Yes, I whispered, the word thick with years of swallowed anger and humiliation. Rowan. Every time. It was always her who minimized it, who cleaned up the mess, who insisted I just needed ice and rest. Never a professional diagnosis. I didn't know how to explain the insidious patterns. The way Rowan would loudly joke about how clumsy I was. Effectively preventing me from feeling shame and seeking real help, all while positioning herself as the caring sister. It's like she wanted to be the first person I turned to, and the last person I doubted, I thought. Before I could articulate that thought, the exam room curtain was violently thrown back. Amber Lynn Dalton, what on earth are you telling these people? Marlene swept inside, followed by her husband, Gerald. Rowan was not with them, but Marlene's presence, radiating indignation and controlled panic, somehow filled the room with her sister's influence anyway. Marlene's hair was perfect, her suit immaculate, a performance of normalcy battling the sterile chaos of the hospital. A fracture. Marlene demanded, her voice rising in disbelief. From a birthday joke. This is ridiculous, Amber. Tell them you're confused. You bruise easily. You've always been sensitive. You need to tell the detective you misunderstood. Sensitive. Dramatic. Overreacting. The familiar litany of minimizing words that had shaped my entire childhood pressed against the fragile confidence I had just found. For a terrifying moment, the noise of my mother's disapproval threatened to drown out the quiet authority of the detective and the objective truth of the X-ray. I felt myself start to shrink back into the familiar, compliant daughter. Detective Carver stood up immediately, her posture calm but unyielding, placing herself between Marlene and me. Mrs. Dalton, I need you to step back. Your daughter is speaking with me privately. Marlene ignored her, her gaze fixed on me. Freudian fear twisting her perfect features. It wasn't the fear of what Rowan might have done. It was the fear that I was exposing the family. Betrayal. That was the emotion in her eyes. Betrayal that I dared to speak up. In that singular moment, I realized what I had always been fighting for, not just safety, but the right to my own reality. If I backed down now, Rowan would win, and the lie would continue to define my life. I spoke, and the sound of my own voice, steady and quiet despite the tremor beneath it, felt foreign and powerful. Mom, I said, looking her directly in the eye, forcing the connection she usually avoided. I'm not confused. Marlene's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and sheer disbelief. She opened her mouth, ready to unleash another torrent of denial. But the words faltered. For the first time, she couldn't immediately regain control of the narrative. I turned fully toward Detective Carver, the blood pounding less fiercely now that the decision was made. Detective? I want to continue. I want to tell you everything. Detective Carver nodded, her gaze acknowledging the silent battle I had just won. She calmly instructed Marlene and Gerald to wait outside, using a tone that made it instantly clear this was not a request. As the curtain snapped closed, the room felt lighter, the suffocating presence of denial finally gone. I felt terrified, exposed, and utterly determined. I had finally chosen my own truth over my family's peace. The moment the curtain closed on Marlene's furious, disbelieving face, the air in the exam room seemed to clear. Detective Carver returned to her seat, her focus unwavering. My decision to continue felt solid, heavy with consequence but right. "Thank you, Amber," Carver said softly. "That took courage. Now, let's go back to the pattern of injuries. The minimization from your sister and mother is a classic indicator in these kinds of family dynamics. You mentioned your sister always insisted on cleaning up and controlling the narrative around accidents. Can you describe one of those incidents in more detail?" I recounted the small hurts, the constant, seemingly casual ways Rowan found to make me look weak or clumsy. The time my bag mysteriously spilled over a railing at a family picnic, scattering documents into the wind. The way she insisted on walking behind me on any uneven surface, only for me to inexplicably stumble. The way I would try to argue or defend myself, only to hear, "You're just too sensitive," repeated by everyone until I believed it. Carver listened patiently, occasionally jotting down a detail. "The pattern you describe?" she confirmed. "The injuries, the minimization, the pressure not to seek medical help. Combined with Dr. Hanley's findings, it's concerning. We need to treat this seriously, which means we will investigate your sister." Just as she was outlining the next steps, interviewing witnesses at the restaurant and reviewing local security footage, there was a tentative tap at the curtain. "Detective Carver, is this a bad time?" My Aunt Elise, Marlene's older sister, pushed the curtain open just enough to peer inside. Elise was usually mild-mannered and avoidant, the complete opposite of Marlene's dramatic energy. Her eyes were puffy, glossy with something that looked too heavy to be mere shock. Carver looked at me for a silent moment of confirmation. I nodded, trusting Elise more than anyone else in that wing of the family. Carver motioned her inside. "Avery," Elise whispered, using my middle name, which was what she always called me. Her voice trembled, and she rushed to my side, gripping my hand tightly. Her skin was cold. "I tried calling you last night when I heard what happened, but when I couldn't reach you, I had a terrible feeling. I drove straight here." She looked directly at Detective Carver, her entire body rigid with forced control. "Detective, I have information that I should have shared years ago. I've seen Rowan hurt Amber before." My entire body stilled. Rowan was the abuser. But Elise was the first person outside of the authorities to use the words "seen" and "hurt" in the same sentence about my sister. Elise began, her voice shaking violently. "When Amber was little, there were moments, small at first, that I rationalized away. Sibling rivalry, kids being too rough. But as they got older, Rowan became calculating. Or maybe I just finally saw it clearly." She wrung her hands. "I saw her push Amber on the stairs once. Amber was maybe 12. Everyone thought she slipped. Marlene certainly insisted on it. But I was standing right at the top landing. Rowan shoved her hard, right between the shoulder blades. A rush of cold memory flooded me, the sudden lurch, the sickening tumble, and the immediate, overwhelming shame I felt for ruining a family holiday with a bruised cheek. Rowan had instantly been there, hovering, offering cookies and fake sympathy. While Marlene scolded me for being clumsy, Elise wasn't finished. She took a trembling breath. "And 3 years ago, after our grandmother Eleanor's funeral. That was when Amber inherited the Victorian house, you know. I overheard something. Rowan didn't say it to Amber's face, but she was furious. She was telling someone on the phone that it wasn't fair, and Amber was too quiet and incompetent to manage the property, and that accidents happen, when people get in the way." The room went very still. Even Detective Carver paused, her pen hovering mid-air. A terrifying, cold clarity settled over me. Rowan hadn't just been eliminating me physically, she was eliminating me as a potential heir. The beautiful Victorian house, The one thing our grandmother had left me, the only person in the family who valued historic preservation, had become a motive for calculated violence. I should have told you, Avery. Elise whispered, her voice cracking. I was scared of Marlene. Scared she would cut me out entirely. But after what happened yesterday, I can't stay quiet anymore. I saw her face after she shoved that cake, and it wasn't a joke. Carver stood slowly. Thank you, Elise. This helps us build a much clearer timeline and establish motive. She looked at me, her gaze softening slightly. Amber, right now, your safety is my priority. Do you feel safe going home? The honesty that had started to bloom inside me answered immediately. I'm not sure I do. Carver nodded. That's an honest answer. For now. Elise will take you home. You are to stay away from Rowan and the family residence until we have processed the evidence. We need you safe and away from any further influence. I agreed, realizing that the truth, finally spoken by an ally, was so much more freeing than the heavy, silent loyalty I had carried for decades. I looked at Elise, this quiet woman who had risked everything, and felt the first flicker of genuine, external protection I had ever known. 2 days passed in a blur of forced quiet. I was barricaded in my small Seattle apartment, which felt strangely safe now that I knew I wasn't alone. Elise stayed with me, sleeping on the couch, her quiet company a soft anchor against the churning uncertainty in my stomach. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the infrequent, hushed phone calls from Detective Carver. I didn't argue with Elise's insistence that I should not be alone. The thought of running into Rowan, of hearing her voice again, made the hairline fracture in my skull throb in protest. I spent most of the time staring out the window at the constant Pacific Northwest drizzle, replaying the last 20 years. Rowan's presence in every mishap, Marlene's immediate defense of her favorite, and my own tireless efforts to make myself smaller, quieter, and less deserving of space or concern. Elise would occasionally bring me tea, sitting in silence, a witness not just to Rowan's specific acts, but to the decades of my quiet suffering. On the third afternoon, the phone rang, breaking the tense stillness. It was Detective Carver. I answered immediately, my hand trembling as I brought the phone to my ear. Amber, it's Detective Carver. I have an update on the investigation. Her voice was steady, professional, giving away nothing. What did you find? I asked, the question barely a breath. I knew, intellectually, that the truth was bad, but I wasn't prepared for the cold, unassailable evidence she was about to present. We finished processing the security footage from the restaurant, she stated. Amber, I need you to understand that what you experienced was not a joke or a clumsy accident. I closed my eyes, Elise instantly moving to sit beside me on the couch. How bad was it? It was deliberate, Carver said plainly. The camera angle was high, but very clear. She didn't stumble, she didn't lose her grip. Rowan angled the platter of cake directly toward your head. She looked over her shoulder first. A quick movement, making sure no one was specifically watching her, and then she shoved. She put muscle into it. A cold wave washed through me. A shock so deep it temporarily replaced the physical pain. She looked over her shoulder first. That detail, small and clinical, transformed the incident from a moment of drunken cruelty into an act of calculated malice. For 24 hours, I had questioned if the pain was real. Now, I learned the intent was too. And after you fell, Carver continued, her voice softening slightly, there's a moment. Barely a second. Before, she threw her arms around you and started playing the panicked sister. She smiled. A slight, quick upward pull of the mouth. Almost triumphant. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I hadn't imagined it. The sharp, feral flicker in her eyes I remembered was real. It wasn't confusion or poor timing. It was satisfaction. I felt Elise's hand squeeze my shoulder, solid and grounding. We have enough from the footage and Dr. Hanley's report to move forward with charges of assault," Carver announced. "But there's something else. Something you need to prepare yourself for." My chest tightened, dread pooling in my veins. What could possibly be worse than knowing the attack was premeditated? We obtained a warrant to seize and search Rowan's phone and personal electronics. Carver explained. Found notes. Detailed. Dated entries that confirm the pattern you described. I listened, unable to speak, the silence on my end prompting Carver to continue. "She kept a record," Carver said. "Dates that match your rib fracture incident, your fall in the parking lot last year, and several other minor injuries you attributed to bad luck." She categorized them. They weren't just journal entries, they were almost professional logs. A terrifying image flashed in my mind: Rowan, sitting alone, coolly cataloging my pain, turning my physical weakness into data points. "And finally," Carver said, her voice dropping to a serious tone, "we found a file on her tablet. It was labeled Future. It was not a diary. It was a list of projected opportunities. When you would be alone, when you would be most vulnerable. She was tracking your movements in relation to the Victorian house, when you were going to be working on the repairs, when you might be visiting the property alone." A deep, bone-chilling tremor rippled through me. This wasn't spontaneous hatred. This was a calculated, long-term plan to ensure my ultimate incapacitation or removal. The cake attack wasn't an endpoint. It was just the latest maneuver in a campaign of domestic terrorism. The small, quiet betrayals of my childhood suddenly magnified into something monstrous, something with intent to cause continuous, serious harm. Carver said gently, sensing my shock. This wasn't just spontaneous anger or sibling rivalry. This was systemic, planned violence. She was creating these opportunities. We are moving forward with charges based on the pattern of assault, and the evidence indicating intent to cause future harm. I sank back into the couch, feeling Elise's weight grounding me. The truth, objective and terrifying, was finally out. "We have to make the arrest now, given the evidence," Carver continued. "I need you to be present at a meeting, Sunday evening, at your mother's house. We are going to execute the arrest there." A tremor rippled through me. Why there? Why in front of everyone? "Because, Amber," Carver's voice was firm, delivering the final, necessary blow. "This time, the entire family needs to see the truth. They need to see that the person they protected and the person they dismissed were both real. And we need to ensure that when Rowan finally shatters her facade, there are witnesses who can't later claim confusion." I finally found my voice, thick with emotion. "I understand. I'll be there." Hanging up the phone, I looked at Elise. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the horror of the details. The quiet dread of the last 2 days had transformed into a clear, sharp resolve. I wasn't just going to a family meeting. I was going to witness the collision of my past reality with the hard, objective force of justice. It was terrifying, but I knew I couldn't shrink away from it now. I had to face Rowan one last time, with the full weight of the evidence and the law standing behind me. The only question left was how Marlene would react when her carefully constructed world of denial finally burned down. Sunday came too quickly, cloaked in a gray Seattle haze that matched the tension in my chest. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a carefully staged legal operation. A moment designed to force the truth into the light. Elise drove me to Marlene's house, the same house that had served as the physical location for 2 decades of quiet dismissals and fabricated memories. The house felt like a museum of my pain. As we approached the door, Elise placed a hand on my arm. "You don't have to speak, Amber," she reminded me softly. "You just have to stand there." I nodded, gripping the small, smooth stone I kept in my pocket, a grounding object. My head still healing, pounded slightly, but the clarity of the last 2 days had replaced the fear with a cold, sharp resolve. I was no longer the girl minimizing her own pain. I was the witness to a crime committed against myself. When we stepped inside, the dining room was already occupied. Marlene was arranging flowers on the mantelpiece, her movements stiff and overly deliberate. Gerald, her husband, stood near the window, looking pale and nervous. And Rowan, of course, was already there, glowing with the careless ease of a person who believed they had fully won. She was laughing, chatting loudly about a recent promotion, perfectly embodying the favorite daughter, the son around whom everyone was expected to orbit. Her facade was flawless, her charm weaponized. She stopped talking the moment she saw me. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, the pleasantness around her mouth tightening into a smirk. "Oh, look who's finally healed," Rowan said, her voice dripping with false concern, loud enough for Marlene to hear. "Still overdramatizing a simple birthday prank, Amber. Seriously, you need to lighten up." Marlene turned immediately, humming disapproval. "Amber, please. Don't start anything. We are here to talk about peace." Start anything. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. As if I had ever been the one to initiate the chaos. I took a deep breath, fighting the old urge to defend myself, to argue, to shrink. I didn't say anything. I just stood my ground beside Elise, allowing my silence to be the answer. Before Rowan could make another comment, there was a firm, measured knock on the heavy oak front door. Marlene frowned, irritated by the interruption. "Who on earth is that?" Gerald moved to open it. Detective Carver stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed Seattle police officers. They were quiet, professional, and their very presence instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The casual, domestic setting was annihilated by the heavy, undeniable presence of the law. Carver stopped just inside the dining room archway. Her voice was clear, calm and utterly final, slicing through Rowan's performance. "Rowan Dalton," she said. "You are under arrest." The room erupted. Marlene shouted, "This is absurd. Detective, you need to leave my home at once." Gerald backed away quickly, his face ghostly white, hands held up in a gesture of pathetic surrender. Elise, next to me, stayed rigid, a pillar of support. But Rowan's transformation was instantaneous and total. The pleasant facade drained away, leaving behind something sharp, exposed, and utterly feral. Her eyes went wide, not with fear, but with outrage. "You're kidding me." Rowan laughed, the sound too loud, too high, pitched, lacking any genuine humor. "For what?" A birthday joke that Amber, as usual, completely exaggerated. Carver didn't flinch. She took a step forward. "You are under arrest for assault. And for evidence found in your possession indicating intent to cause future harm." Rowan's eyes flicked toward me, narrowing into cold slits of pure, incandescent hatred. She saw me standing there, silent and steady, and recognized the source of her downfall. She realized the truth had finally been externalized. "You think you're so perfect, Amber." Rowan spat, her voice tight with rage, her mask now entirely gone. "You think you deserve that house. You think Eleanor loved you more, because you were the quiet little mouse. She only pitied you." Marlene gasped, clutching her throat. "Rowan, stop. You don't know what you're saying." But Rowan was past stopping. She was unraveling in real time, spewing 20 years of buried resentment into the silent, witness-filled room. "I've cleaned up after her my whole life," she ranted, tears of fury streaming down her face. She was always pathetic, always fragile, always failing. And everyone, especially Mom, acted like I should feel guilty for being stronger, for being better. I was the one who had to carry the burden of her weakness. Carver cut in, her voice louder now, breaking through the hysteria. "That's enough, Ms. Dalton." But Rowan lunged forward, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my chest, ignoring the officers closing in around her. The sheer, raw hatred radiating off her was overwhelming, absolute, and directed squarely at me. "You ruined everything the day you were born," she screamed, her final words a desperate, undeniable confession of her life's motive. The officer stepped in immediately, gripping Rowan's arms. She thrashed, screaming protests and denials, but the metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. "Mom, tell them. Tell them Amber is exaggerating! Tell them she's sensitive." But Marlene wasn't moving. She stood frozen in the center of the room, her face ghostly white, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that I had never witnessed before. She was seeing her perfect, beloved daughter exposed as a dangerous, calculated menace. And the mountain of evidence, the old fractures, the notes, the video footage, finally clicked into place. She finally, truly, understood the monster she had protected with her silence and denial. Rowan's voice cracked into a desperate, high-pitched wail as the officers quickly and efficiently escorted her out of the house. The slamming of the front door was a sound of finality, echoing the end of a long, toxic era. The slamming of the front door was a sound of finality, echoing the end of a long, toxic era. She had lost her daughter, the one she loved, to the truth. I stood there, heart hammering a triumphant rhythm against my ribs, realizing the world had shifted again, definitively in my favor. The lie was over. I was free. I looked at Marlene, still frozen, and knew that while I was finally starting to heal, her own painful reckoning had just begun. The truth, in that moment, was the most powerful form of justice. The aftermath unfolded quietly, almost gently, like a world finally deciding to hand me a softness I had never been allowed to touch. After the front door slammed and the sirens faded, the absolute silence in Marlene's dining room was deafening. Marlene remained frozen, staring at the spot where Rowan had been, her face a crumpled mask of shock. Gerald finally moved, going to her side, but he couldn't reach her. She was miles away, trapped in the debris of her shattered denial. Elise placed her hand firmly on my back. "We need to leave, Amber," she murmured. Now, I didn't argue. I looked once more at my mother, who hadn't even registered my presence, and felt a complex wash of pity, anger, and final relief. I had expected fireworks, tears, a final defense of Rowan, but Marlene was simply broken. The truth had finally forced her sight, and it was a terrible thing to witness. I walked out of that house and into the cool evening air, leaving the toxicity behind me. In the weeks that followed, the legal process moved with quiet, professional efficiency. Detective Carver was true to her word, keeping me updated without requiring endless emotional recounting. Rowan, faced with the overwhelming evidence, the security footage, the phone logs detailing planned future assaults, and Elise's testimony, accepted a plea arrangement. It wasn't the dramatic trial I might have once envisioned, but it was just as steady, undeniable, and binding. Rowan pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for supervised probation, mandatory intense therapy, and, most crucially, a long-term protective order preventing her from ever coming within 500 feet of me. I wouldn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. Marlene barely spoke during the legal proceedings. When the evidence was read aloud, when the video of Rowan's cold, planning smile was entered into the record, something inside her seemed to collapse inward. She didn't try to contact me to apologize, or even to defend Rowan. She simply disappeared into a haze of quiet shame. One afternoon, almost a month after the arrest, she finally called. Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual performative cheer. "Aber," she started, her voice thin. "I started seeing a therapist last week." I gripped the phone tighter, waiting for the inevitable pivot back to Rowan's perspective. It didn't come. Not for Rowan. Marlene clarified, her voice barely above a whisper. For myself. For the years I spent denying what I didn't want to see. For the mistakes I made prioritizing the loud noise over the quiet damage. I didn't know how to respond to such a sudden, monumental admission of guilt. It wasn't the apology I needed, but it was an acknowledgement of the truth, which was perhaps more valuable. I said the only honest thing I could manage. I hope it helps. Mom. Our relationship remains minimal, marked by careful boundaries. The codependent need to please her, to earn a validation I would never receive. Finally died the day I watched her world shatter. I am healing my skull and learning to rebuild my emotional scaffolding without her approval. The Victorian house became my refuge. It was the legacy Rowan had coveted, and it was the physical manifestation of my independence. Restoring it felt like restoring myself, room by room, memory by memory. As I stripped away the old, peeling wallpaper and uncovered the original, sturdy wood beneath, I realized I was doing the same to my life, removing the surface lies to reach the strong foundation I always had. My purpose became clear. When the restoration was complete, I didn't move in alone. Instead, I opened the doors as the first meeting space for the Eleanor Center, named after my wise grandmother. It's a resource hub for people trying to untangle themselves from family, made wounds and domestic trauma. People who were told their entire lives they were too sensitive. Standing in the newly refurbished parlor, watching the first group of quiet, brave survivors gather, I felt something I had never felt growing up. I felt safe, seen, and utterly free. Some people say that family loyalty means enduring anything, staying quiet to keep the peace, no matter the cost. But I've learned that real loyalty, real self-love, doesn't demand silence in the face of harm. It requires a fierce protection of your own reality. It requires walking away from the people who taught you doubt your own pain, and finally claiming the right to your own story. I am still learning what a healthy, autonomous life looks like. I am still finding my footing inside the freedom I never expected to have. But if my story proves anything, it's that truth doesn't just break things apart. It clears the space, a beautiful, necessary void, for something infinitely better to grow. If you've ever carried a wound like mine, know that you are not dramatic, and you are not alone.